Chapter 1. Return to the station. Twilight fell on the small town in soft, warm shadows. When Emily got off the last evening bus, the streets were almost empty. Only a few passers-by wandered toward the houses, dimly lit by lanterns that dimly flickered through the veil of evening fog. The asphalt retained the warmth of the day and gave it to the cool air, mixing with the smell of fresh herbs and old dust raised by the wheels of the bus. Emily inhaled so deeply that she felt a little dizzy. It smelled completely different here than in the city. Instead of exhaust fumes, there was the smell of lilacs from front gardens and the dampness of old walls of houses. She stopped at the corner to enjoy this silence. The sounds of the metropolis still rang in her ears, but here, in this sleepy corner of the world, even her own footsteps sounded too loud. Simon's Creek Station was a kilometer from the center. The road to it ran along rows of houses with low roofs and wide porches. Some of the houses already had lights on, and Emily could hear someone in one of the yards flicking a switch, calling the cat home, or lazily watering flowers with a hose. These sounds, these simple scenes of life, gave her a strange feeling, that time passed differently here, that here everything could be real. She walked slowly, letting the memory fill the space around her. There was the fence on which she and a friend had drawn wavy lines with chalk as children, depicting a river. There was the huge elm tree under which she read books, hiding from the heat of the day, and there was the turn onto the narrow path that led to the station, the path along which she always skipped when she heard the distant whistle of a train. The station appeared suddenly, around a bend in the road. The evening light of the lanterns made the building look like an old set for a forgotten movie, peeling walls, a slanted roof, rusty signs, a barely noticeable sign, Simon's Creek. The clock above the entrance stopped at a time that was different every time. Today it showed 1947, although the watch on her wrist was fast by a good 10 minutes. They said that this clock was special. The old people claimed that it showed each person his own time, the time of hope or the time of fear. Emily believed this legend since childhood, and now, as an adult, she still looked at the clock with quiet trepidation, trying to understand what the frozen hands wanted to tell her. There were several empty benches on the platform. The wood on them was rough and cold from the evening dampness. She chose the farthest one, the one that as a child had been her favorite place to wait for trains. She sat down, stretched out her legs, put her head on the back and closed her eyes. Her heart beat slowly, as if adjusting to the rhythm of the old station. The rustling of leaves sounded in her ears, light, like a whisper, but at the same time full of power. Occasionally, rare sounds could be heard in the silence. Somewhere in the forest a bird screamed, somewhere in the distance a door slammed. But the main sound was the rustle of her own memories. Here, at this station, she waited for trains every summer, dreaming that someone special would get off one of them. Someone who would understand her, who would make her believe that she was not alone in this vast world. She remembered how, at the age of 10, she sat on this same bench, clutching her backpack with books that she took to the city library. Then it seemed to her that a train ride was the most important event in her life. She remembered her grandmother's voice, which sounded in her head like a melody. "Don't rush, dear, all the best things come to those who know how to wait." Then she did not understand that waiting meant not just sitting, but also keeping hope in yourself, even when nothing around you changed. Now, many years later, she came back. Not because she missed something in the city, but because she missed herself. That Emily who laughed when the rain fell, who ran along the wet boards of the platform, not afraid to fall, the one who believed that the most amazing things were just ahead. Through the sleepy swaying of the lantern at the station, she noticed movement. Someone's silhouette appeared on the opposite side of the platform, a guy with a backpack and slightly disheveled hair, tall, with a slight stoop, like someone who spends a lot of time in thought. He walked slowly, as if he was afraid to scare the night away, and in his eyes there was the same restless light that Emily's own eyes had once lit up. She felt her breath catch. Because she realized, this was not just a random passerby. This was someone whose appearance would change her life. Someone she had probably been waiting for her entire youth. Chapter 2. First words. The silhouette came closer, and Emily could see the guy. Dark hair fell over his forehead, his eyes sparkled in the light of the rare lanterns, and his steps were careful, as if he was afraid of stumbling not on the platform boards, but on the very silence that filled the evening. On his shoulder, he carried a worn backpack with patches from different places, small emblems of cities, names, some of which Emily did not even know. When their eyes met, time really seemed to slow down. They stood opposite each other, not daring to start a conversation, and only the rustle of the wind and the rare crackling of grasshoppers seemed loud in this silence. "Are you waiting for a train?" he finally asked. His voice was soft, a little hoarse, like a man who had been silent for a long time. "Rather, I'm waiting." Emily hesitated, surprised herself by how honest she was ready to be with this stranger. "I'm waiting for myself, the one I lost long ago." He chuckled, not at her, but with her, as if he understood every word she said. "I'm James," he said, holding out his hand. "And I think I'm looking for someone, too." Their handshake was warm and firm, and Emily felt a shiver run through her body, not from the cold, but from something she couldn't explain. They sat down next to each other on the same bench. At first they were both silent, only occasionally stealing glances at each other. From time to time the wind brought them the scent of wet grass and fresh pine branches from the edge of the station. Finally James began to speak, and his words flowed slowly, like the night itself. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he said. "But I don't know where exactly. Just to a city that will seem right when I get there." "You don't know where you're going?" Emily asked, surprised but not condemning. "You know how it is when your heart tells you that you can't stay here any longer." James looked her straight in the eye. "It's like that for me." Emily smiled, for the first time in a long time, not forced, not polite, but real, warm. "Yes, I know," she answered quietly. "That's why I'm here." They talked for hours. At first about simple things, about childhood, about funny stories, about how James once got lost in a huge bookstore and spent the whole day there reading books. Then their conversations became deeper, about fears they kept inside for years, about dreams they were afraid to voice even to themselves. At times, Emily felt like words simply couldn't contain everything that was happening between them now. When the clock at the station struck midnight, they both jumped. The sound was unexpectedly loud, metallic, like a bell. At that moment Emily noticed that the hands of the clock showed a different time than on her watch. The clock at the station had stopped at 23:11 and did not move, despite the sound of the chimes. She thought about the legend and felt a chill on her skin. Did the clock really show everyone their own time? "Why did you come here?" James asked, interrupting her thoughts. "Because I wanted to remember myself. The one who believed in miracles. The one who thought that if you really wanted to, everything could be changed." She smiled through her sadness. "And you?" "I came because my happiest day once began here. And I hope that something new will begin here." James' words echoed in Emily's heart like a hum, as if something deep inside her was slowly waking up after a long hibernation. Then they were silent, just sitting next to each other, sometimes touching shoulders, and looking at the stars that shimmered in rare islands between the passing clouds. In this silence, each heard not only the rustling of leaves and the distant rumble of a night train, but also the rhythm of the other's heart, and this was the best conversation in their entire lives. Chapter 3. The Night That Wouldn't End. The night was sinking deeper and deeper into the station, and the moon was now hanging almost at its zenith, filling the platform and the rails with a cold silver light. The station seemed cut off from the rest of the world, no sound of cars, no lights from the city streets, only stars overhead and the occasional whistle of the wind walking between the old lanterns. James and Emily went beyond the platform, onto a narrow path leading to the bridge over the river. In the darkness, everything around seemed a little different. The familiar outlines of bushes and trees turned into bizarre silhouettes, and every rustle sounded mysterious and exciting. "Aren't you afraid of the dark?" James asked, squeezing her hand a little tighter when the branches of an old willow bush brushed their shoulders. I used to be afraid, Emily admitted. When I was a child, it seemed like the forest was full of monsters. And now the darkness feels cozy. As if it can hide me from everything. They stopped on the bridge. The river murmured softly under their feet, reflecting the moonlight and twinkling stars. James leaned on the railing, Emily stood next to him. When I was a kid, I dreamed of becoming a captain, he said, looking at the flow of water, to sail the seas, to discover new shores. And I dreamed of becoming a writer, Emily smiled, to describe all my adventures. Even if they only exist in my head. Their laughter echoed over the water, but then died down, giving way to silence in which each of their pulses sounded especially clear. Emily closed her eyes and listened to the sounds of the night, the cry of a distant bird, the splash of water, the light beating of James's heart, which seemed to echo in her chest. When they returned to the station, the clock still showed 11:11 p.m. It seems that time has really stopped for us, Emily said, sitting back down on the bench. Or maybe it's a sign, James answered thoughtfully. Maybe sometimes everything stops to give us a chance to understand something. They sat for a long time, sharing stories from their childhood. Emily told about how she would climb the tallest elm tree on the edge of the village to argue with her friends. James remembered how he would run away to the roof of his parents' house and dream about the stars. They talked about the books they loved, about the music that saved them on difficult days, about the films that made them laugh and cry. With each passing minute, their words became more and more frank. The thing I'm most afraid of is living my life without leaving anything behind, James said, looking at the rails glittering in the moonlight. And I'm afraid to wake up one day and realize that everything I did wasn't for me, Emily whispered, her eyes filling with tears. James gently took her chin and raised her face to his. The moonlight fell on her hair, making it almost white, and her eyes were shining with tears. You've already changed the world, at least for me, he said seriously. You taught me to feel. Emily hugged him, and they sat for so long that the stars had time to change for others, and the moon moved to the horizon. They didn't notice the cold, only each other's warmth. They ran their hands over their faces, as if they were afraid to forget every feature. When the light dawn began to illuminate the treetops, Emily felt a strange calm, as if the night, so long and important, gave her the strength not to be afraid of the morning. I don't want this to end yet, she said, clinging to him. And I, James replied, burying his face in her hair. But even if this morning separates us, I will always remember this night. Chapter 4. When the night fade. The dawn crept up on the station slowly, spreading milky pink light across the sky. The wind died down, and an almost unreal silence reigned around, the kind that only happens before the world finally wakes up. Simon's Creek station seemed godforsaken, no trains, no people, just a couple of figures on the edge of the platform, holding on to each other as if their lives depended on it. Emily sat with her cheek pressed against James's shoulder, catching the last minutes of this night. It seemed like the station itself was breathing with them, adjusting to their quiet conversations and silence. They fingered each other's hands, as if trying to memorize every line, every curve, imprinted in their memory forever. When did you feel that everything had changed? James asked, looking at the first rays of sunlight breaking through the fog. When you said you felt like a stranger in your world too, she answered after a pause. Because I realized I wasn't alone. James nodded slowly, sighed, and looked at his watch. The hands had finally moved and showed that the train was due to arrive in 20 minutes. Emily looked at the station clock. It was still at 23:11. Her heart sank. It seemed like the clock was trying to stop the moment, but the dawn was stronger than any magic. You'll leave, right? Emily's voice wavered, but she didn't look away. If I don't go now, I may never be able to leave again, James admitted with such frankness that his eyes glittered in the sun. But I don't know what's worse, leaving or staying. At that moment, a rumble rolled through the station, a sound she hadn't heard here for many years, the distant clatter of wheels on rails. At first it was almost indistinguishable, but with each passing second it became louder, more real. Somewhere around the bend, the smoke of the locomotive was already visible. Emily felt the cold penetrate to her very bones. She stood up, and James stood up with her. Their eyes met, long, full of words that were never said. "Will you come back here?" she asked. "If this place is still waiting for me," he answered, hugging her so that she felt the beating of his heart. "And will you wait?" She did not answer. She simply kissed him, gently, but with the strength that contained everything, her fears, her hopes, her love. The roar of the train became deafening. The station was filled with an echo of metal, and the thickening morning fog swirled from the whirlwind raised by the carriage wind. The engineer blew his whistle to announce their arrival, and the train slowed, clanking to a stop just in front of them. A few passengers began to leave the carriages, but for Emily, the world narrowed to a single figure, James, who stood at the threshold of the carriage, unable to take a step. Time seemed to drag. Even the sun seemed to freeze on the horizon, watching them. James took the last step, climbing into the carriage, but before the door closed, he looked at her one last time. His eyes were full of pain, but in that pain there was also hope. As the train moved, Emily ran along the platform. Slowly at first, then faster, until she was out of breath. She ran until the last carriage disappeared into the haze of dawn. Only then did she stop, put her hands on her knees and sobbed, feeling a shudder run through her entire body. The station was empty. The sun had risen fully, casting a golden light on the tracks. The fog had begun to clear, revealing a view of the forest, the river, and the road to town. Emily rose slowly and saw that the station clock had finally started ticking again, its hands clicking forward. And she knew, time had not stopped, but this night would stay with her forever. When Emily returned home, she took out of her pocket the small thing James had slipped into her palm before they boarded, a tiny pendant in the shape of a clockwork mechanism. She clutched it in her hand, and for the first time in a long time, she felt certain that things could still be changed, that the train that had once taken her happiness away could bring it back.